Hello again and welcome to another live English language blockchain webinar. Happy to have you as always, and this week I want to give you a bit of an understanding about smart contracts, which are, well, a very relevant thing in the blockchain and DLT space, of course. So yeah, that's today's topic. Can be considered part 2 of the blockchain basics webinar that we did a while ago. And yeah, with that, let me get started. And as per usual, after this, you have the opportunity to ask questions to this topic or others as well in the chat, give feedback, or give me suggestions or wishes for topics that you would like to see in the future. And with that, let's get started. Okay, so smart contracts. Yeah, topics today, or subtopics of this bigger topic is, what are they in the first place? Then what can they do? We'll give you a few examples. And then wrapping up with issues that are still to solve and oracles. What are oracles and what are they for? So let's get started. First, I would like to introduce the term itself and the origin of the term. So where does the phrase smart contract even come from? And I find it a little bit interesting that the term smart contract was introduced way before blockchain was a thing. So the Bitcoin white paper came out in 2008, but the term smart contract has been introduced and used since then. In 1993, that's 15 years before the Bitcoin white paper even came out, which is again a bit before Bitcoin itself came out and was usable. And yeah, it was introduced by a computer scientist by the name of Mark Szabo. And his definition of a smart contract was that a smart contract is a computer protocol or program that maps or validates contracts, real-world contracts as you know them, or supports supports the negotiation or execution of contracts technologically. And that's not exactly how we use it today in the blockchain space, but it is still good enough. It is still quite fitting. So before really going into what a smart contract is, I just want to quickly recapitulate the properties of data on distributed ledger technologies like blockchains. Because yeah, you will see why in a moment. So the properties that data has on a public and decentralized blockchain is that the data is distributed. That means it's not in one place, it's not just in one computer or just in one data center. It is distributed usually over most continents and worldwide, and thousands, 10,000s or more of computers, which is a good thing, because if one or a few fail or the whole data center burns down or something like that, you still have enough distributed copies of the data elsewhere, so that's just not an issue. Then is the decentralization is the next feature of DLTs and data on DLTs. Decentralization now does not mean the same as distribution, as in it's not all in one place. Decentralization talks about governance. Who is able to send your coins, for example, who is able to ban you from sending your coins, if anyone, stuff like that, and who can censor you. And on a public public decentralized blockchain, nobody can, and that means your data can't be censored or deleted or anything like that, which is a good thing, of course. Then the data is the correctness of the data on a blockchain or DLT is very easily verifiable. So you know that mining is a thing, and that is computers putting work in to make sure that the transactions that were submitted to the blockchain are actually all valid and correct and can happen. And then it's finding a signature for that block. So there's a lot of calculation power necessary to validate all that stuff before the block is done. But when that is done, then it is extremely easy and costs very little computing power and therefore also energy and time to just look, is this correct, yes or no? And that's a good property, because it means it takes a lot of power to put data on there compared with verifying the correctness of that data. And yeah, that means you can be very easily sure that the data on a blockchain is correct. And last but not least, it is, it's irreversible. Transactions on blockchains are irreversible. And that has different upsides. For example, if you give a service to someone, you do some work, you do their garden, and they pay you. And if they could just charge that back the next day, as is possible with credit cards, for example, or bank accounts, then the garden is still done. You still did it yesterday, but now you don't have the money. That's a potential downside of reversible transactions. This can't happen if transactions aren't reversible. And also you can't put data out and then easily take it back. And all these properties together make DLTs and blockchains, and therefore also the data that is stored on them, just very robust, incorruptible, can't really be censored or taken down. And these are really cool properties that data on a DLT has. So now let's go into the actual question, what is a smart contract, from the technical, and here especially, of course, in our context, the distributed ledger technology perspective. So in that frame of, or in that perspective, a smart contract is, again, a program or code, computer program or code, that exists and is executed on a distributed ledger technology. That's really what it is. If you want to have the shortest possible bullet point, what is a smart contract? That is it. It is a computer program, computer code that lives on and is executed on, runs on a DLT, usually blockchains, but DLT are diversifying. And what I like to say, and this is why I recapitulated the properties of data on blockchains and DLTs, is that smart contracts are for code what DLT is for data. And by this, I mean that the code of these programs inherit the properties that data has on a DLT, all the properties that I mentioned on the slide before. And this means that we have the same thing that we have for data on distributed ledger technologies, and that is this trustless trust. You don't need to trust an entity or a person or anyone or a government, because the data, the code, you can just trust that. It's open, you can look at it. Doesn't necessarily mean you're able to understand the source code, but you can read it. And if you are able to understand, then you can verify for yourself that everything is as it should be. And yeah, now with smart contracts, we have this trustless trust, not only for data, but also for contracts and also for other things. And that is what they are. Now, a few examples of smart contracts to show you a few things that they can do. Example one is just very simple crowdfunding. So the old school crowdfunding, not offline old school with crowdfunding events in like in the physical real world, but the old school just compared to the decentralization space. And by this, I mean platforms like Kickstarter, for example. I think Kickstarter is the biggest and most well-known. There you can say you need this much money because you want to do that. And then people can give you money and collect that over a certain period of time. And if the time is up and you reached your goal, then you get the money. And if you didn't reach your goal, then you don't get the money. The people get their money back. And this has quite a few issues for everyone involved except the platform itself. On the donor side, they need to trust that platform. They need to trust the platform to not run away with the money, for example, to really pass it on and things like that. Now, in the example of Kickstarter, it's extremely unlikely that they will just run away with the money. They are too established and too big and old for that. I admit that, of course, but it's still a thing. And for other younger, smaller platforms, it's a bigger thing. Trust is necessary. Maybe not so much with Kickstarter, fair enough, but some is still necessary. The project, on the other hand, also has the same issue. It needs to trust Kickstarter to actually give them the money later. That's one downside. Another is the very high fees that these platforms take. So the last time I checked, which was a while ago, I didn't check it again today. The last time I checked, Kickstarter took 8 to 10% of all the money collected. And that means if you're collecting $1 million, then 100,000 of that goes to Kickstarter. And that is obviously not in the interest of the donors that want to fund the project, or in the interest of the project that wants to do its project, right? That's really, it's bad for everyone involved but Kickstarter. And last but not least, I would say, is an issue with all these centralized platforms that they censor. And of course, they can do that. They basically just decide, oh, I don't like what you intend to do. I don't like your face. I just feel like that today. So no, you're not allowed to crowdfund on our platform. And that's that. And this means that there is many things that are worthy of some funding and worthy of donations that are just not allowed on these platforms because they don't fit the agenda of the companies behind them. Now let's have a look how this can be in the fully decentralized world using a smart contract. Same basic idea. A minimum amount of money is is necessary to be able to do something. That's something I just call project here. Now, let's imagine we have a smart contract instead of a platform like Kickstarter, and that is open source. That means the people can read the source code, and some of the people that read it will understand and are then able to confirm, yes, the contract really does do what the project people say that the contract should do. And that means that the donors do not need to trust any platform because they just see, they can confirm for themselves that it will work exactly as advertised, which is if the minimum is reached in a certain time, then the project gets the money. And if it's not reached in that time, then the money just gets sent back. And yeah, with having no platform, no middleman, and no censorship, that means that the donors as well as the project people don't have to trust any platform. There's nothing in between those two parties that want to interact with each other. And of course, the fees are negligible. If we're talking about substantial-ish sums, like 6 or 7 digits, then the fees for the blockchain transactions, for the smart contract, and so on, is very negligible if we compare that to the 8 to 10% that Kickstarter takes or other platforms of that type also take. So that's the things smart contracts can do. And I think that's a really cool and useful thing. Another example is an investment. Instead of crowdfunding donations, an investment into a project, not necessarily with the goal to make it a successful project that has maybe social impact or something, just to make money. Fair enough. So my second example is a standard ERC-20 token sale on the Ethereum blockchain. They have been called ICOs. Now they're coming up with all kinds of new abbreviations. It's usually an I and then something and then an O. But yeah, let's take an ICO, for example. And that works like that it says, okay, we want to do this and we want to build up this business or protocol or something, DeFi platform, whatever. And we need at least this much money and we need at most that much money. So there's a minimum and a maximum. And then there's a time frame in which the minimum should be reached. That's all saved in the contract, in the smart contract, of course. So then the investors can just come and send, for example, Ethereum to the smart contract. The smart contract is receiving and holding this Ethereum. And so that means also that the smart contract knows at every point in time how much Ethereum it has in itself right now. And that also means that when the time is up and the minimum is not reached yet, then the smart contract will notice time is up, minimum is not reached. Okay, everybody gets their Ethereum back, nothing happened. Or the smart contract can notice, this last payment that I received brought me over the minimum. That means we are now in successful funding phase. So now the collection of money just continues until either the maximum is reached or the time frame is simply up, whichever happens first. And then in that case of the successful funding, then the smart contract will, when either max is reached or time is up, will just look at how much Ethereum, like what share of Ethereum of the overall sum collected was sent by each individual address, and sends the corresponding share of tokens of that project back to that address. And now the investors got their tokens of that project that they want to invest in and think might be successful. And the project now has the Ethereum to actually pay people, hire people, pay salaries, and build their project. Another example is, there's so many, of course, it's tricky to pick the best ones because there's just so many. Another example I want to give, though, is a tokenized and rented out house. I did put a German phrase in here. That happens sometimes. Sorry about that. So we have a house the ownership of which is represented by an amount of tokens, because as I said, the house is tokenized. Let's, for simplicity's sake, imagine the full house is represented by 100 tokens. So the house is split, tokenized into 100 tokens. And now let's imagine there's 3 different people that own this house together. One owns 40%, and that also means 40 tokens in my example. The other 35, the other 25%. Not that the numbers really matter. And now the tenant can just pay with crypto. The tenant can pay rent with crypto directly to the smart contract. The smart contract receives that payment, and then it just looks up of the 100 tokens, how many tokens are on what address, and then it will send exactly that share represented by your share of the tokens to the different owners. And so the distribution can work completely automated. And again, those owners don't have to trust each other, don't necessarily even have to know each other, maybe. So yeah, that's another side here. And another, just an example of things that are possible. And of course, one owner could just sell 1 or 2% that he owns in this house to somebody else if he needs money quickly, and no problem, then that other person will just get 1 or 2% of the rent in the future, because now the tokens that represent the house, the ownership in it, are on that other address. And yeah, there's many upsides of doing things this way. This is why tokenization in general is such a big thing. Now, the issues that are still to solve with smart contracts. It's basically one big regulatory issue and one big technical issue. So let me start with the regulatory one. And I'm using the example of the tokenized house here again. Now, what legal ways exist to deal with a situation like, for example, the main owner of that property tells the tenant, you know what, don't send in crypto to that contract address. You can just pay me directly, either in cash or with a bank transfer, and you pay $50 less if you do it like that instead of crypto. Now, the issue is that now the rent all goes to one person, and the smart contract doesn't have any crypto to distribute. So now basically the other owners need to go down the legal route, need to go to court of law and try to get their money from the main owner who is not passing it on anymore. How likely is it that the court will actually accept that? And this is what I would try to express with the last line on this slide here. A digital contract is just not the exactly same thing as a legally binding contract. And not all digital contracts are legally binding. Some are, but smart contracts in general are not per definition legally binding. They can be, but they are not. And that means it's a possibility that the judge will say, I don't care what tokens you have, I don't even know what that is. It says on this piece of paper, this person is the owner of the property, and that's really that case solved. And this is an issue in general with tokenization and blockchain and stuff, really very generally. All the regulation and so on, and when are things that are true and fact on the blockchain also accepted as such in courts? That's an important question that is still being worked on by the lawmakers. The second issue that we have is a technical one, and that is that smart contracts can only access data that is on the same blockchain, on the same distributed ledger as that smart contract. Nothing else. It can't read websites. It can't like watch outside or something. It has only access to data that is on that DAT, the smart contract itself is onto. But that creates some issues. So for example, if we want to make a smart contract about sports bets, where people can pay in on the end result of a certain game or tournament, and when the result is in, then the smart contract should distribute the winnings accordingly. But that means the smart contract needs to know the result of this particular game or tournament. And well, that's obviously like only offline. How does this information get in there? That's one issue. And the same general issue of how do we get information that's not on the blockchain. Another example for that is if we have smart contracts that are used for exchanging completely different cryptocurrencies against each other. How do we make sure that the smart contract knows the current prices so that it can say, oh, for this much of token A, you get that much of token B? Rate for different pairings. And that could, for example, be done by looking up the fiat prices of both or the Bitcoin or Ethereum prices of both, making on the smart contract needs to get this from somewhere. A technical problem is it made great progress and great strides, but it's also definitely a work in progress. Are oracles. That's what oracles are and what they do. Oracles are for cross-DLT, cross-blockchain, as well as communication between and non-DLT, so blockchain and not even blockchain. That can mean oracles can communicate between this blockchain and that blockchain. An example might be Ethereum and Binance Smart Chain. Oracles can also put data onto a blockchain that is not at all on the blockchain. For example, the results of a sports game or the current temperature, if that is useful, stuff like that. Oracles can, and yeah, that's what oracles do. They're really the interface between the DLT and therefore also the smart contracts because they live on the DLT and everything that is not on that same DLT, be it on a different DLT or be it completely non-DLT. And yeah, examples are results of games, prices of different cryptocurrencies, and another nice example, I think, is what IOTA is working on, or IOTA, never sure how to pronounce it, the IoT space, Internet of Things space, where there exist ideas like machines can pay thermometers for the information of the current temperature or humidity, because then maybe the machine needs to run in a different mode. And they could all do this directly between each other without anybody being involved, any human being involved in that. Then the question is, though, again, if the data is temperature, that needs to be put on the blockchain, right? It's not on the blockchain naturally. If what IOTA wants to do, it wants to go into automotive specifically and has ideas like you plug your electric car into a charging station and then your car pays for the power you're using automatically. You don't have to deal with that. It just happens. You just sometimes top up your IOTA wallet. That's the idea there. But then, of course, the question is, how much power did you use? What was the price per unit right now? Now we have to multiply this to know how much you or the car actually have to pay. But yeah, these calculations are necessary. Otherwise, how much we don't know. And this means that information, again, has to come to the blockchain somehow. And that is exactly what oracles do. I won't have time to go into how they do it in this webinar. Maybe if the interest is there, we could do just oracles and a bit more about how they're actually working at a different time. But yeah, for today, that would just go too far. And yeah, I think I can wrap up with the statement that dependable and trustworthy oracles are an essential part of this new distributed, decentralized world, of the new DLT world, so that the smart contracts on that can communicate with the outside world, be the outside world just a different blockchain, or be the outside world something online, something digital that's not blockchain, or be it something completely not even digital like temperature information. Yes, that is that. I hope that was understandable. I hope it was a little bit interesting. And now I will, as per usual, have a look into the chat and see if any questions, feedback, or anything else came up. Does not look like it so far. Okay. Then yeah, I will just wait a few minutes and see if anything comes up in the chat. And if not, then I bid you a good rest of your day and a wonderful weekend as well. Thank you for the feedback. Danke gleichfalls, Sebastian. Ciao, ciao. Yeah, I think no more questions are coming. It's very quiet in the chat. And so, as I said, do have a good rest of the day. Have a great weekend, I hope. And I would appreciate if you're tuning in again next week. So I hope that, yeah, we see each other again, or you see me again next week. Until then, bye-bye.